The grand throne hall of the Vril Empire shimmered under the glow of 1,000 crystal lights. Tall pillars of blue stone reached toward the ceiling, carved with alien runes that sang softly when the wind passed through the open arches. The air itself smelled of flowers from distant planets and metal from the guards' armor. It was a place meant to remind everyone who entered that they stood before power, before the young Empress of the Vril. She was only 24 standard cycles old, a mere girl by the age of her kind. Yet she carried the crown of an empire that stretched across 3 galaxies. Her name was Elira Vril, the bright flame of the stars, the ruler who commanded fleets larger than worlds and armies filled with creatures bred only for war. When she walked, her silver robes flowed like living water, and her golden crown caught the light of the twin suns outside, painting fire across her hair. But her eyes, bright and cold, were not fixed upon her nobles or her banners. They were fixed upon a single man standing quietly at the end of the hall. He was not one of her kind. He was human. Captain Daniel Ross, a soldier from Earth, stood silently in the corner among her royal guards. His armor was plain gray, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He didn't move, didn't bow, didn't speak unless spoken to. Where other guards shifted or coughed or fidgeted, he stood like a statue, still, silent, and strangely calm. To the nobles, he was an insult to the court, a lesser being allowed to stand among the elite. To Elira, he was an experiment, a curiosity, a symbol of the alliance between her empire and the humans of Earth, a race known for their stubbornness and violent history. The treaty had been signed decades ago after the War of 10 Suns, where both species nearly destroyed one another. Since then, humans were allies, though no one in the Vril court truly saw them that way. They saw humans as animals, clever, emotional, unpredictable, dangerous in their smallness, but Elira, she found them fascinating. Every morning she would notice him standing there at his post. The other guards would gossip quietly, whispering about his strange eyes, his scarred hands, the way he always refused to look away from the throne. Some said he was arrogant. Others said he was broken. Elira wasn't sure which one was true. There was something about him that made her feel uneasy. Not fear, but something deeper. The kind of feeling one had when they looked at the stars too long and realized how small they were. Daniel Ross carried that feeling with him, as if he had seen too much, survived too much, and now stood there not because he wanted to, but because he had nowhere else to stand. One morning, as the Empress entered the hall for her daily court, she paused before taking her throne. She glanced once toward the human soldier and said softly, almost to herself, "Still here, Captain?" Daniel's eyes met hers for the briefest second. He nodded once. "Yes, Your Majesty, that was all. No flattery. No nervousness, no fear. Just calm obedience." It irritated her, and intrigued her even more. Throughout the day, she listened to reports from generals and governors. The nobles praised her victories, warned of small rebellions in the outer colonies, and debated over politics. Yet every now and then, Elira's gaze drifted back to the human who stood so still by the pillar. He didn't seem to belong, and yet somehow he did. He didn't speak the way her people did, didn't move the same way, but there was a quiet dignity about him that none of the alien nobles possessed. As the court continued, an old noble leaned toward the throne and whispered, "Your Majesty, that human soldier, do you truly trust him? Their kind once burned half the stars in war. They are wild, impulsive creatures." Elira smiled faintly, never taking her eyes off Daniel. "Perhaps. But sometimes wild things are the most loyal when tamed." The noble chuckled nervously and said no more. When the session ended, Elira dismissed her advisors and stood from her throne. As the guards bowed and the courtiers began to leave, Daniel turned slightly, preparing to escort her as part of her retinue. She studied him for a moment longer, then spoke again, her voice calm yet sharp. "Tell me, Captain Ross," she said, "what does your world think of service, of loyalty?" Daniel looked at her directly this time. "We serve those who deserve it, Your Majesty." Her lips curved faintly. "And do I deserve it?" He didn't answer. For a brief moment there was silence between them, heavy, almost personal. Elira's heart flickered with irritation. No one had ever refused to answer her. She was Empress. She was divine in the eyes of her people, but this small human dared to stand before her as though they were equals. He didn't mean disrespect. His face was calm, almost sad. Yet that quiet confidence struck her more deeply than open defiance ever could. Later that night, in her private chamber, Elira looked out at the city of light beneath her balcony. Billions of citizens bowed to her name. Millions of soldiers would die for her command. And yet her thoughts wandered back to the silent man who had looked her in the eye and given her nothing. Not fear, not admiration, not hatred, just silence. She told herself it was foolish to think of him. A human was nothing to her, a tool of the treaty, a token of alliance. But when she closed her eyes, she could still see the calm strength in his face. There was something unbreakable about him, something her world of power and pride could not understand. The next morning, when she entered the hall again, she found him already at his post, standing the same way, silent as ever, and though she would never admit it aloud, the young Empress found herself standing a little taller, speaking a little clearer as if she wanted to see whether that human, that strange, unreadable creature, thought she was worthy of the crown she wore. In that glittering hall of crystal and pride, among all her alien lords and perfect soldiers, it was the quiet, fragile human who made her feel most alive. And though neither of them knew it yet, that silence, that strange connection born of pride and restraint, would soon ignite a story that would shake the empire to its core. The next morning began, with the sound of distant bells echoing through the marble corridors of the imperial palace. The virile court was already alive with noise, voices rising, jewels clinking, robes sweeping the floor. Empress Elira Vrel sat high on her throne, surrounded by shimmering light, as her advisors and nobles gathered for another long day of reports, debates, and political games. She looked beautiful, untouchable, but her mind wasn't entirely in the room. Somewhere between the words of her generals, her thoughts drifted toward the corner of the hall where the human soldier stood as he always did, quiet, straight, and watchful. Captain Daniel Ross didn't move, didn't blink too much, didn't even seem to breathe loudly. It was strange how easily her eyes found him among dozens of her guards. He wasn't the tallest or the strongest, but there was something about his stillness, a silent storm inside that drew her attention even when she tried to ignore it. As the court went on, a young noble named Lord Cyrith stepped forward. He was known for his arrogance, wearing golden armor polished to perfection, and a voice that always carried pride. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "the rebellion in the outer sector continues. Perhaps it is time to send a real warrior, someone with strength, not just words." Elira raised an eyebrow. "Do you question the strength of my commanders?" "Never, my Empress," Cyrith said quickly, smirking. "But maybe we can test our new ally." His eyes slid toward the back of the hall, landing on Daniel. After all, humans love to fight, do they not? A few nobles chuckled. The sound was sharp and cruel. Elira didn't respond. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the human soldier. Daniel's expression didn't change. He simply looked forward, standing like an iron post in the wind. Cyrith's grin widened. "Come now, Captain Ross, tell us. What would you do with the rebels if they rose against your world?" Daniel's voice came calm and clear, cutting through the laughter. "We'd stop them, simple words. No arrogance. No hesitation." The hall went silent for a second, then erupted into soft laughter again. "Stop them?" Cyrith mocked. "Such wisdom. Tell us, human, would you stop them with those small arms of yours? Do you even know what real battle looks like beyond your fragile earth?" Elira should have silenced the noble, but a part of her wanted to see how the human would respond. She wanted to test him, to understand the strange pride she felt whenever he spoke. So she leaned back on her throne and said softly, "Yes, Captain. Tell us, what would your people truly do if an empire like mine turned against you?" Daniel looked at her, directly, without fear. His calm gray eyes didn't blink. "We'd fight," he said. "Even if we lost, we'd fight until there was nothing left." The nobles laughed again. But Elira felt something stir in her chest. That voice, steady and unshaken, carried something she hadn't felt in years. Conviction, but she couldn't show that in front of her court. She was Empress, ruler of the stars. So she smiled, sharp and cold, and said, "So simple. No wonder your kind always burns so quickly. You humans live short lives, and yet you speak as if you understand eternity." Her words sliced through the silence. The hall trembled faintly under the echo of her voice. Some nobles smiled in approval, proud that their ruler had reminded the lesser being of his place. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't lower his head. He didn't show anger or pain. He simply stood there and silent, calm, eyes straight ahead. The moment stretched like glass ready to crack. Elira waited for him to defend himself, to say something, to show emotion. But he didn't. He just turned. Without a word, Captain Daniel Ross pivoted on his heel and began to walk away from the court. The nobles gasped. Some whispered in shock, others sneered in delight. But Elira, she froze. No one ever walked away from her. No one. The sound of his boots echoed across the polished floor, each step slow and heavy. The laughter died. The whispers stopped. Every alien eye followed the small, quiet human as he passed between them. A soldier walking through a sea of power and pride, untouched by their scorn. Elira watched him leave. Her hands trembled slightly, on the armrest of her throne, though she didn't know why. She could have ordered him to stop, could have demanded his apology, could have punished him for the disrespect of turning his back to her throne. But she didn't. Something inside her, something she didn't want to name, kept her silent. When the massive doors closed behind him, the silence that followed was suffocating. For a long time, Elira didn't speak. The court shifted uneasily, waiting for her to explode in anger. But instead she whispered almost to herself, "Dismissed." The nobles bowed quickly and fled the hall, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat there for several minutes, staring at the spot where he had stood. The air still seemed to hum faintly from his absence. It was as if his silence had weight, a heavy thing that stayed even after he was gone. Elira leaned back and pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted to admit. "Foolish human," she muttered under her breath. So fragile, yet so proud. And yet, that pride was not arrogance. It was something else, something she had never seen in her own people. The Viral were powerful, yes. They ruled through fear and order, but Daniel's pride came from something deeper, something quiet and unbreakable. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Not angry, not afraid, just calm. A silence that spoke louder than any argument. It was the kind of silence that made her question herself. Had she truly shown her strength as Empress today? Or had she simply shown her fear of what she didn't understand? When dawn came, the first light of the suns fell through her window. Elira stood at her balcony, her reflection faint in the glass. She whispered into the cold air, "Why didn't he speak?" The wind didn't answer, but somewhere deep in her chest, something whispered back. Not with words, but with feeling. A quiet understanding that unsettled her more than any threat ever could. For the first time since she took the throne, the Empress felt small, and she realized something she had never known before. Power was loud, but dignity, true strength, was silent. The sound of the great hall's doors closing echoed through the palace like the end of a song. The laughter, the whispers, the noise of power, all faded the moment Captain Daniel Ross walked out. The vast chamber that once felt alive with pride now felt strangely empty. Empress Elira Viral sat on her throne, motionless. Her silver crown caught the light, but her heart felt heavier than it ever had. She should have been angry. No one, not a noble, not a general, not even a visiting king, had ever dared to turn their back to her and walk away. But instead of fury, something else settled in her chest. Guilt. It burned quietly, like a spark she tried to ignore. For a long moment, the only sound in the hall was the soft hum of the crystal lights above. Elira's hands gripped the arms of her throne, her nails biting into the cold surface. The court was empty now, but the weight of what she had done lingered. Her words, cruel, careless, meant only to show power, now echoed in her mind. So simple. "No wonder your kind always burns so quickly," she had said that. And he had answered with silence, not weakness, not fear, Silence. It wasn't submission. It was something stronger. That calm, unbroken quiet felt like defiance in its purest form, the kind that didn't need words to stand tall. When Elira finally stood, the hem of her robe brushed across the marble floor. She stepped down from her throne, her reflection moving in the polished surface beneath her feet. The hall that usually made her feel so powerful now seemed too big, too cold. She walked toward the great doors where Daniel had disappeared, her footsteps soft and uncertain. For the first time, she realized how quiet the palace was without his presence. That human, that small, strange creature from Earth, had left behind something invisible. His silence had weight. It filled the air. That night, Elira did not attend the royal feast. Instead, she sat alone in her private chamber. The golden lights shimmered over her desk as she read report after report about the rebellion in the outer sectors. Worlds were burning, cities falling, but her thoughts kept returning to the human soldier who had walked out of her hall without a word. She tried to tell herself that he was nothing, just a guard, just one of many. But the truth whispered inside her. He wasn't like the others. There was something in him that her own people lacked. Something raw, something real. Her eyes drifted toward the small communication crystal on her desk. She could summon him back with a word, command him to explain himself, punish him for defiance. She had every right as Empress. But her fingers didn't move. Instead, she sat back and closed her eyes. Why does his silence bother me so much? She whispered to herself. The answer didn't come. The next morning, Elira entered the throne room as she always did. The nobles bowed, the guards straightened, but the space beside the eastern pillar was empty. Daniel Ross was gone. At first, she thought he might have been reassigned, perhaps dismissed himself from the post. But then her chief guard, Commander Terrell, approached and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said, voice hesitant. "The human... He left the palace last night. He took his weapon, his armor, and his ID code. No orders, no escort." Elira blinked. "He left without permission?" "Yes, Empress." He said nothing, just walked out through the south gates. Something inside her chest twisted painfully. "Did anyone stop him?" "No one dared, Majesty. He was your personal guard. We thought perhaps you had sent him." Elira dismissed the commander with a wave of her hand, her voice quiet but trembling. "Leave me." When he was gone, she turned toward the tall windows of her hall. Beyond them stretched the glittering city of Verelion Prime, a maze of silver towers and glowing bridges. Somewhere out there, among the crowds and ships, that silent human was walking away from her. Again. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Regret. That night, sleep refused to come. The stars outside her balcony glimmered coldly, but her thoughts burned. Why had he left? Because of her words? Because she had humiliated him in front of everyone? Or was it something deeper, something she had never seen until now? By morning, messengers arrived from the outer sectors. Their reports were grim. The rebellion had grown stronger. The virile fleets were losing ground, despite superior weapons and numbers. The rebels were spreading fast. Elira listened, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the railing of her balcony. Her empire was vast, yet suddenly it felt fragile. And for some reason she couldn't explain. Her mind kept whispering one thought over and over. He would not have run from this. Hours later, while she was reviewing the latest data on the war front, her advisor rushed in. "Your Majesty, a transmission from the outer sectors." Elira frowned. "From whom?" The advisor hesitated. "From the human, Captain Daniel Ross." Elira's heart stopped. She ordered the message to play at once. A blue hologram flickered to life before her, grainy, unstable, but clear enough to see the man she thought had abandoned her. His face was smeared with ash, his armor dented, his voice tired but steady. "Outer Sector 9 secured," he said. Hostiles neutralized, civilians safe. Casualties minimal. The message ended there. No request for help. No demand for reward. Just those few words. Elira stared at the empty space where the hologram had been. Her hand trembled as she touched her chest. He hadn't left her out of anger. He had left to do what needed to be done without orders, without support, without fanfare. He had gone alone, to fight her war. A silence filled the room again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of guilt, it was the silence of realization. The nobles had laughed at him, she had mocked him, and yet, while her empire hesitated, the human acted. Elira sank slowly into her throne, her eyes distant. She whispered to herself, he didn't walk away in weakness, he walked away in strength. For the first time in her reign, the proud Empress of the Virile felt something she never thought she would feel toward a human. Respect. And somewhere far away on a burning world she had never seen, a lone human soldier stood beneath alien skies. His armor cracked, his body bruised but his heart unbroken, fighting for an empire that had insulted him, and for a ruler who was only now beginning to understand the meaning of silence. The news of victory from the outer Sector 9 spread across the empire like fire in dry grass. At first no one believed it. The rebellion had crushed every army the Virile had sent. Entire legions of machines and soldiers wiped out in weeks. But now somehow the human, the same one who had walked away in silence, had turned the impossible into truth. Empress Elira Virile sat alone in her throne room as the report was read aloud. Her advisors spoke in hurried tones, their voices full of disbelief. "He went alone, Majesty," said Commander Tyrell. "No backup. No communication with the fleets. He took only a shuttle and landed right in the middle of the war zone." Elira's eyes lifted slowly. "Alone?" "Yes, Empress. The local forces say he organized the colonists, repaired broken defenses, and fought the rebels for 3 days straight. The rebellion's leader was killed in close combat." The room fell silent. Every alien in that chamber felt the weight of those words. Elira leaned back in her throne, her golden crown gleaming under the pale light. But inside she felt no pride, only confusion and something else she didn't want to name. Guilt, perhaps. Wonder, maybe both. She remembered how she had mocked him, how she had called his people fragile and small. And now that same human had done what her armies, her generals, her proud fleets could not. Later that evening, she dismissed the court and walked through the silent corridors of her palace. Outside, the twin suns dipped below the silver skyline, painting the sky in deep violet hues. She walked without her guards, her soft footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Her mind was full of the image of that human soldier, standing amidst fire and death, refusing to fall. In her private chamber, she sat beside the wide window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there he was still fighting, still alive. She wondered if he ever thought about her, about the words she had said. Thousands of light years away, Captain Daniel Ross stood on a ruined battlefield under a blood-red sky. The air smelled of smoke and burnt metal. The world beneath his boots trembled from distant explosions. Around him, alien colonists, farmers' workers, even children, hid behind broken walls, staring at him with a mixture of awe and fear. Daniel's armor was cracked, his visor shattered, his uniform scorched by plasma burns. But his eyes, those steady human eyes, still burned with purpose. He wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't fighting for medals. He fought because people were dying and someone had to stop it. When the rebels came again, charging through the smoke, Daniel raised his rifle and shouted to the colonists, "Hold the line! Protect the civilians!" His voice was firm, calm, carrying through the chaos. The aliens, the same ones who had once looked down on him, now followed his every word. The battle raged on for hours. Plasma bolts tore through the air, explosions lit the horizon, and dust covered everything. Daniel moved like a machine, fearless, precise. Every time someone fell, he was there, dragging them to safety, shouting orders, patching wounds, firing until his rifle overheated. He didn't care about the pain. His body screamed, but his will didn't break. On the third night, the rebels launched their final attack. Hundreds of them stormed the broken city, their banners burning in the wind. Daniel stood at the front, gripping his sword, an old weapon from his Earth training. forged of steel and human resolve. When the rebel leader, a tall alien with burning red eyes, appeared through the smoke, Daniel didn't hesitate. "You're the human?" the leader snarled. "You came to die alone?" Daniel looked at him, calm, steady. "No," he said. "I came so others wouldn't." Then he moved. The two clashed in a storm of sparks and fire. The alien struck with strength that could crush stone, but Daniel was faster, sharper. Every swing carried the weight of something larger, not just survival, but conviction. When the final blow came, the alien fell and the battlefield went silent. For the first time in months, the smoke began to clear. The people stepped out of their shelters. They saw the human standing alone in the center of the ruins, blood on his armor, his sword buried in the ground beside him. They bowed to him, not as a soldier, but as a savior. Daniel didn't say anything. He only nodded and sat down beside the broken wall, exhausted, staring at the rising suns. He thought of the Empress then, the woman who had looked at him with pride and scorn in equal measure. He wondered what she would think if she saw him now, covered in dirt and ash. He didn't hate her. He just wished she could understand. Back in the capital, Elira didn't sleep that night. When the full report came in, she dismissed everyone and sat alone at her table, reading each word carefully. Outer Sector 9 secured. Civilians saved. Minimal casualties. Rebel leader neutralized. She reached the end and froze. Attached to the report was a short note, handwritten in the human's rough letters. No reinforcements needed. Situation under control. Returning when safe. DR no bragging. No request for reward. Just quiet, steady certainty. Elira traced the initials with her finger. Something inside her chest tightened. "He should have hated me," she whispered. "And yet he fought for my people." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the palace engines. Outside, the stars shimmered against the dark sky. She rose and walked to the balcony. From there, the city looked peaceful, lights stretching for miles, alive and bright. She wondered how many of those lights would still shine if he hadn't gone. For the first time, the young Empress felt the truth of her empire. All the fleets, the armies, the palaces. They meant nothing without the hearts that kept them alive. And the strongest heart she had ever seen didn't belong to a virile. It belonged to a human who had walked away in silence. Her eyes glistened as the cold wind brushed her face. She whispered to the stars, "Come back alive, Daniel." Days later, another message arrived. This time, a video feed. It showed Daniel aboard a damaged ship, piloting through debris fields. His face was tired but calm. Behind him, alien refugees sat huddled in the dark. He looked into the camera briefly and said, "Outer Sector civilians secured. Returning home." Elira's breath caught in her throat. Home. He called her empire home. That word, small and simple, broke the last wall inside her. The pride, the arrogance, the coldness all melted away. She sat there in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks as the transmission ended. The human she had insulted, the soldier she had dismissed, had become something far greater than a protector of her throne. He had become the heartbeat of her empire. The shuttle carrying Captain Daniel Ross limped through space like a dying bird. Sparks burst from broken panels. The engine roared weakly, every pulse threatening to stop. Daniel sat in the cockpit, one hand on the control stick, the other pressing against his side, blood leaking through the torn armor. He had taken a plasma hit during the final fight. It burned deep, far worse than he had let anyone see. But there were civilians on board, frightened alien families staring at him with desperate eyes. He couldn't stop. Not yet. "Stay seated," he said calmly, his voice rough from pain. "We'll be home soon." Home. The word echoed in his mind. He wasn't even sure what that meant anymore. Earth was far away. The Virile Empire was not his home either. At least it hadn't been. But maybe it could be. The stars outside blurred as the shuttle re-entered the capital system. The comms crackled. A voice came through, soft, trembling, familiar. "Daniel, this is Empress Elira. You're alive." He managed a small smile. "Still here, Your Majesty. Though my ship might disagree," her voice caught slightly. "We are tracking your descent. You'll land in the Royal Bay. Medical teams are waiting." "Copy that," he said, forcing strength into his words. But as he guided the shuttle down, the world tilted. His vision dimmed for a second. He clenched his jaw, refusing to let go of the controls. When the ship finally touched the landing pad, he exhaled in relief. The ramp opened, and the refugees rushed out, mothers clutching children, workers thanking him in broken words. Daniel stayed behind for a moment, breathing hard. His hands trembled. The wound had soaked through his uniform. He took one step down the ramp and staggered. Then everything went black. The next thing he felt was light. Soft, golden light on his face. A faint scent of clean linen. He tried to move, but pain shot through his ribs. "You're awake," came a voice. Gentle. He turned his head and saw Elira sitting beside the bed. She wasn't wearing her crown. Her long silver hair was tied loosely behind her. For once she didn't look like an empress. She looked like someone who hadn't slept for days. "How long?" he asked quietly. 3 days, she said. "You almost didn't make it." Daniel tried to sit up, but she placed a hand on his chest and soft but firm. "Rest," she said. "Please." He looked at her hand, then at her eyes. "I thought you had better things to do than sit beside a broken soldier." She smiled faintly. "You're not just a soldier anymore." Her words confused him. "Then what am I?" Her gaze softened. "You're the reason thousands are alive. The reason my empire still stands." He looked away, uncomfortable. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she whispered. They wouldn't. Silence filled the room. Only the hum of the medical machines and the soft beat of his heart broke it. Elira looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "When you first came here, I thought humans were weak. I was wrong. I see now your strength isn't in your body. It's in your heart." Daniel gave a tired smile. "We've had to be strong or we wouldn't have survived our own world." She reached out and gently brushed the dirt still stuck near his cheek. "You risked everything for my people," she said. "Even after how I treated you." He met her gaze. "You were doing what rulers do. Protecting your pride," she looked down. "And you protected my people instead." There was something in her eyes, regret, admiration, and something deeper that even she didn't want to name. Days passed. Daniel recovered slowly, though the wound still burned with every movement. Elira visited often, sometimes bringing reports, sometimes just sitting in silence. The guards outside whispered that their Empress had changed, her voice softer, her orders more thoughtful. One evening she found him standing on the balcony looking over the city lights. His uniform was repaired, but he still looked weary. "The doctor said you should rest," she said, walking up beside him. He chuckled softly. "I've had enough rest. The world keeps moving, right?" She looked at him, the wind playing with her silver hair. "You're different from anyone I've ever met, Daniel." He shrugged. "Humans are good at being stubborn." She smiled, then turned serious. "Do you ever regret coming here?" He thought for a moment. "No, I came as a guard, but I found something worth more than duty." Her heart skipped. "And what is that?" He looked out at the horizon. "People, hope, the idea that even across stars we can still care about each other." She was silent for a long while. Then she said softly, "You're too noble for a soldier." He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how many of us are like that." The air between them grew still. For the first time, Elira realized how quiet the universe could be, and how much noise one human heart could make. Later that night, after he had gone back inside, Elira stood alone under the twin moons. Her thoughts swirled like wind through the gardens. She had ruled through fear, through power, through the weight of her ancestors' names. But this man, this silent human, had changed everything without commanding a single army. He had shown her what leadership truly meant, not control, compassion, not obedience, trust, not fear, love. Her heart beat faster at that last word. She closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Why does it hurt to care?" No answer came, only the soft hum of the city below. But somewhere inside her, a truth had begun to bloom. Fragile, frightening, beautiful. She was no longer the Empress who looked down on mortals. She was a woman who had seen what real strength looked like, and it wore a human face. The next morning, Daniel was gone from the med bay. He left only a note on the table, simple, written in his rough handwriting. "Don't worry. Just walking. Needed to see the world I fought for." Elira read it and smiled softly. She whispered to herself, "You saved my empire, Daniel, and now maybe you're saving me too." Outside the window, the twin suns rose again, golden light flooding the palace halls. The war was over, but a different kind of battle had begun. One fought not with weapons, but with hearts learning how to heal. And for the first time, the Empress of the Stars found peace not in victory, but in the warmth of a single human's courage. The night sky over the virile capital shimmered like a sea of frozen light. The twin moons hung close together, their glow painting the palace gardens in silver. Empress Elira stood alone among the crystal flowers, their petals glinting softly in the wind. The Empire had survived the rebellion, the people were safe again. Yet her heart was far from calm. It had been 2 weeks since Captain Daniel Ross recovered and left the medical wing. He still lived in the palace, but she rarely saw him now. He spent most of his days helping rebuild the damaged sectors, teaching her soldiers how to fight as humans did, with patience, teamwork, and heart. He never boasted, never spoke much, just worked quietly like always. But every time she caught a glimpse of him from afar, that calm walk, that quiet focus, something inside her stirred. Something she couldn't name yet couldn't ignore. Tonight she had summoned him to the garden, not as his ruler but as something else. When Daniel arrived, his boots barely made a sound on the marble path. His uniform was clean but worn. A scar traced the edge of his neck, half hidden beneath the collar. He stopped a few steps away and saluted. "You called for me, Your Majesty?" Elira hesitated. Formal words felt wrong now. "Daniel," she said softly. "Please, not titles. Not tonight." He lowered his hand, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "All right. Elira, then." She smiled faintly. "That's better." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft rustle of wind through the trees. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but heavy with emotion. "I wanted to thank you again. For everything. You saved my empire. You saved me." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. I did what needed to be done." Her eyes glimmered in the moonlight. "You always say that. Why?" He looked away, his gaze tracing the horizon. "Because where I come from, that's what being human means. We don't fight for crowns or glory. We fight because someone has to. Because it's right." Elira stepped closer, her robe brushing the marble floor. "And what do you fight for now, Daniel?" "The war is over." He thought for a moment, then answered quietly. "For peace. For the people who can't fight for themselves. Maybe for a reason to stay." Her heart skipped. "A reason to stay?" She repeated softly. He looked at her then. Really looked. The moonlight reflected in his eyes, and for a brief second, she saw something there. Something raw. Real. But then it was gone, hidden behind his usual calm. "Yes," he said simply. "A reason." Elira wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to tell him how she hadn't stopped thinking about that day. The day she insulted him and he walked away in silence. That moment had haunted her more than any war. But she didn't know how to say it. She was an empress, raised to command, not confess. So she asked the question that had burned in her heart for weeks. "Why didn't you defend yourself that day?" she whispered. "When I called you small? When I said humans were weak? Why did you just walk away?" Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because words don't change truth, Elira, and I wasn't there to win your respect with speeches. I was there to protect you, whether you saw my worth or not." Her throat tightened. "And yet you left," he nodded. "I left because my silence was the only thing that could speak louder than anger." Elira looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "You shamed me without saying a word." Daniel's voice softened. "I didn't mean to shame you." "I know," she said, almost whispering. "But you did, and maybe I needed that." The breeze picked up, sending her silver hair drifting across her face. Daniel reached out instinctively, brushing the strand away. His fingers grazed her cheek, warm against her cool skin. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Her eyes met his. "You still believe in me?" she asked quietly. "I do," he said simply. "You've changed. You listen now, you care. That's all the galaxy ever needed from its rulers." Elira smiled faintly, a tear slipping free. "You taught me that." He shook his head. "You taught yourself. I just reminded you what you already had inside." The air between them was thick with emotion, a mix of gratitude, guilt, and something deeper neither dared to name. Elira took a small step forward. "Daniel, do you ever miss your home?" "Every day," he admitted. But sometimes when I look at the stars here, I think maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's people." Her heart trembled. "And who are your people now?" He smiled softly. "Anyone who needs me." The answer should have comforted her, but it hurt instead. Because she wanted, selfishly on, for him to say you. But she couldn't ask that of him. Not when he had already given so much. They walked together through the garden, the silence between them no longer heavy but gentle, like a shared secret. The night air smelled of rain and crystal flowers. At the center of the garden stood a small reflecting pool. Elira stopped beside it, staring at the twin moons rippling on the water. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "why fate brought us together?" Daniel looked at her reflection, not her face. Maybe the universe wanted to remind us that strength doesn't belong to one race. Maybe it wanted you to see humanity through something real. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "And what did it want you to see?" He smiled. "That even among stars and empires, kindness still matters." Elira's heart swelled, and before she could stop herself, she reached out and took his hand. For a moment Daniel froze, and then he let her. Their hands fit awkwardly yet perfectly. "I was wrong about humans," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought your kind were loud, reckless, foolish. But you're quiet in ways I never understood, strong in silence." Daniel looked down at their joined hands. "Silence isn't weakness," he said softly. "Sometimes it's mercy." Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with tears. "Then thank you for showing mercy to a proud empress who didn't deserve it." He gave her that small, quiet smile again. "You learned. That's what matters." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of flowers between them. For a heartbeat, the galaxy itself seemed to pause. The empress of 1,000 worlds and the soldier of one small planet, standing together beneath alien stars. There were no more words. None were needed. She felt his warmth beside her. And for the first time in her life, Elira Varel, ruler of an empire, found peace in the quiet presence of a single human being. As Daniel turned to leave, she whispered, almost too softly for him to hear, "You'll walk away again, won't you?" He stopped, glanced back, and said gently, "Only if you tell me to." She didn't, and as his figure disappeared into the silver light, she realized that sometimes silence was not the absence of words. It was the beginning of understanding. The years that followed were years of peace. The empire that had once stood on the edge of destruction began to heal under the rule of Empress Elira Varel. Trade routes reopened, burned worlds were rebuilt, and the people who once feared their empress now looked upon her with respect and love. But there was one figure who had quietly faded from the palace. Captain Daniel Ross, the human soldier whose name had once echoed through every broadcast, every report, every song sung by children across the stars. He had left just as silently as he had once walked away from her throne room, carrying nothing but his old armor and a single small blade. No one knew where he had gone. Some said he returned to Earth. Others whispered that he wandered the edges of the galaxy, helping lost colonies and forgotten worlds. Elira never confirmed or denied the rumors. She simply kept his name alive, quietly, respectfully, like a prayer whispered to the stars. Every year, on the day the war had ended, she would walk alone to the royal balcony and look at the horizon. There, under the twin suns, she would place a single white flower on the railing, a human tradition Daniel had once told her about, a symbol of memory, of gratitude. It was her way of saying, "You're not forgotten." One morning, nearly 5 years after his departure, a faint transmission reached the palace. It came from the outer rim, a distress call intercepted by the fleet. The message was brief, filled with static, but the name that appeared in the signature made Elira's heart stop. Tier Daniel Ross, Human Defense Corps. She didn't wait for reports or approval. She ordered her personal ship to be prepared. Her advisors protested, her guards begged her not to go, but Elira silenced them all with a single command. "I owe him more than my crown," she said. "I will bring him home." The ship tore through hyperspace, slicing across the void until it reached a small, desolate moon. Fires burned across its surface, wreckage scattered like broken bones. Her crew scanned the surface and found life signs, weak but human. Elira's heart raced as she descended with a small team. The air was thin and cold. The smell of burnt metal filled the wind, and there, among the ruins, she found him. Daniel lay near a fallen ridge, half buried in dust and ash. His armor was cracked, his breathing shallow. In one hand, he still held his blade, the same weapon he had once carried when he guarded her throne. Daniel. Her voice broke as she knelt beside him. You stubborn fool. His eyes opened weakly. They were still calm, still kind. Elira, he whispered. Didn't think you'd come all the way out here. She gripped his hand tightly. You saved my empire. You think I'd let you die alone? He smiled faintly. Seems like I always end up saving someone. Tears filled her eyes. Not this time, she said firmly. You're coming back with me. My doctors can heal you. We can... He shook his head slowly. No, too late for that. Elira's voice trembled. Don't say that. You can't leave me again. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something break through that quiet strength. Exhaustion, but also peace. You don't need me anymore, he said softly. You became the ruler you were meant to be. You don't need a human shadow following you around. I don't need a soldier, she whispered. I need you. The words slipped out before she could stop them. They hung in the air, fragile and raw. Daniel's eyes softened. You always had a strong heart, Elira, he murmured. You just needed someone to remind you of it. She shook her head, tears falling onto his armor. You were more than a reminder. You were my strength. He smiled again, his hand brushing weakly against her cheek. Then I did my job. The silence that followed was long and heavy. The wind carried the sound of distant thunder. She wanted to scream, to command the universe to stop. But Daniel's gaze was calm, the same quiet courage she had first seen in him all those years ago. Promise me something, he whispered. Anything, she said. Don't build statues of me. Don't turn me into some story, her voice cracked. Why? Because heroes fade, he said softly. But what they teach should last forever. Promise me you'll remember the lesson, not the man. She nodded, unable to speak. He took a slow breath. You showed me something too, you know. Her eyes lifted. What? That even an empress can learn to listen. A faint laugh escaped her through her tears. You always had the last word, didn't you? He smiled one last time, eyes half closing. Guess so, and then? His hand went still. The world seemed to freeze. Elira stayed beside him for hours, refusing to move, her tears falling silently onto his chest plate. Around her, her guards stood in silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to disturb the moment. When they finally carried him back to the ship, she walked beside him the whole way, her expression calm but her heart breaking inside. Back on the capital world, the news spread quickly. The human who had once saved the empire was gone. The people built monuments anyway, but as she had promised, Elira never called him a hero. She called him something else, a friend. Years later, long after her hair had turned white and her voice had grown soft with age, Elira would still walk to the same balcony each morning. On that balcony, inside a clear glass case, lay Daniel's blade, cleaned, polished, and untouched. Every sunrise, she would touch the glass gently and whisper, You kept your promise, Daniel. I kept mine too. The empire continued to grow, stronger, kinder, wiser. Humans and Viral worked side by side now. No longer strangers, no longer rivals. The lesson Daniel had left behind had spread farther than any war could reach. One day, a young Viral child asked her, Empress, why do you keep that old human sword? Elira smiled, her eyes soft and far away. Because it belonged to the quietest man who ever changed the stars. The child tilted her head. What did he say to you? Elira looked out at the horizon, her heart aching and warm all at once. He said nothing, she whispered, and that silence taught me everything. That night, as she stood alone on her balcony for the last time, she looked at the stars and thought of him, of his steady eyes, his soft words, his calm strength. She realized then that he had never truly left. He lived in her heart, in her choices, in every act of kindness her people now carried out. And as the twin moons rose high above the palace, she closed her eyes and smiled. Rest easy, Daniel. She whispered into the night. Your silence still speaks. The wind carried her words across the galaxy, while to every world he had touched, to every life he had saved. And somewhere among the stars, the quiet soul of a human soldier smiled back.